Thank you all for joining us here today for another IFTA screen discussion. My name is Anya Moriarty here at the Irish Film and Television Academy, and you're all very welcome. Today we are discussing the film Belfast, which tells the story of a young boy played by Dhonghaíle growing up in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and set in 1969 during the Troubles. Caitríona Balfe plays Buddy's young mother, raising two boys, while her husband, played by Jamie Dornan, commutes to England to earn a living. Buddy's grandparents, played by Ciarán Hinds and Dame Judi Dench, also play a key part in his life as his story unfolds on screen. We are delighted to welcome the film's writer, producer, director, Sir Kenneth Branagh, and the film's editor, Una Dhonghaíle, to talk about the making of Belfast. So thank you both for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Anya.
Thank you for taking the time. And look, congratulations to both of you on delivering such a wonderful film. Belfast is really, really a gorgeous film. So well done.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
And so
record-breaking Kenneth Branagh, are we allowed to say that, Anya?
There you go, exactly. So Kenneth, I'll come to you first. And to you personally, look, congratulations, being the first person to be Oscar nominated in 7 different categories. So you've made history. So how does that feel?
It feels absolutely amazing and mind-boggling, although to put it in perspective, I went to see my great friend, the actor Brian Blessed, who'd heard about this record, and he said, oh yeah, Kenneth Branagh, actor, a writer, director, and right bloody knows all. So you can tell what those around me make of this. But no, we're deeply, deeply honoured and amazed. Actually, as you don't ever do anything with any prospect of thinking about things like that. But what it tells me is just what a privileged time I've been to be, in various key parts of the storytelling process. It all has always fascinated and joined up for me, whether it's Una's department in terms of the critical contribution of editing, and Una's made an amazing contribution to Belfast this time around, as she does with Death on the Nile. And so that it always sounds terribly sort of cliched and pat, but what those nominations mean is that you've been lucky enough to be involved with a lot of amazing people around that circle of trying to create the story on film. So I'm deeply chuffed for them and obviously absolutely thrilled myself.
Which is great. And you absolutely hit the nail on the head. It's, when you've been a filmmaker as long as you have, not saying that you're old now or anything, Kenneth, but you get to see real talent along the way, and you know who you want to work with again. And I'm so glad that you seem to now, in recent years, have struck up quite a collaboration with Una Dhonghaíle here, our own very wonderful Irish editor. And Una, you're no stranger to receiving accolades yourself, as you've won many awards for your extraordinary skills as an editor, both in film and drama, such as The Crown, Misbehaviour, Three Girls, Stan and Ollie, Rosie, to name but a few. So Una, for you, having worked so closely with Kenneth in recent years, what were your thoughts when you saw him receiving this recognition in Oscarland?
It was incredible. I mean, we're very proud of Ken for what he's achieved, because even when we read his beautiful script, which he obviously wrote during lockdown, it was amazing even on the page in June 2020. So yeah, no, we're all very, very proud of him, and I'm proud for his family as well, that he's managed to do something which is a real gift, actually, I think, to make a film that can celebrate his beautiful family and the community that they came from and the great city of Belfast. So I think he's done himself proud, and he's done us proud. We're chuffed to bits.
Well, worth saying, not so we're all trumpet blowing is ending now, but I will say that Una has been racking up the nominations from all the distinguished editorial guilds and the BAFTAs and all the rest of it. And so a lot of people had their work recognized in important ways here, and it's definitely not why we end up doing things. And the biggest prize really is an audience, people ready and able and interested to see the work. But when your peers do take the trouble to see it and give you a thumbs up, it's a hell of a thing. So I'm very proud of what Una's done with these pictures, and ditto her beautiful family, who I've seen supporting her across this particular journey. So we consider ourselves very lucky. So that's the end of us banging on about what we've done on you.
That's it. That's it. Absolutely. Well, I guess I'll have to just, well, I'll say it in a very modest way then, Kenneth, that, you know, you do have an incredible body of work as an actor and as a writer and a director, with films such as Murder on the Orient Express, Artemis Fowl, All Is True, Cinderella and Thor. These are, to name but a few of your recent titles, and that's not even mentioning Henry V or Dead Again, or your original Much Ado About Nothing and Hamlet. But Belfast, and that's what we're coming to discuss today, is Belfast is a very different film for you, and a lot of people feel obviously this is your most personal film to date, and the story is inspired by your own childhood in Belfast, and you wrote this during the first lockdown in 2020. And I suppose the question initially is, what made you decide that this was the right time to delve into your past and to tell this story?
Well, I think that the events of the story have definitely been ones that have had a formative influence on me. Whether it was recalling that at that time in Belfast, that was where I started, either on television, through watching what was always black and white, because we didn't have a color TV at that stage, black and white movies, or going to the cinema and seeing the sort of explosion of color. So all the ways to tell stories on the screen were a big part of growing up. They were a big treat, although we lived a lot on the street. With small neighborhoods, small houses. You got out in the street as much as you could, particularly with the weather sometimes in Ireland, you know, the rain can, you know, come down. So when you do get out, get a chance to get out, you do that. But storytelling, full stop, people telling stories, family stories, the community of stories, and this excitement of, you know, film wherever it appeared was definitely something that was a big moment of stamping on the DNA, a love of telling stories that way. And then that joy was interrupted by something that had the same appalling power to interrupt for many, many people on the island, which was the beginning of the Troubles that had started, you know, becoming possible from 1966 onwards, really, with the civil rights movement. And then in various ways, this spilled out onto our street in August of 1969. And what happened for my family, which was a long, extended period of trying to determine what was the best course for them, what was the future for a family in a neighborhood where previously we had lived, Catholics and Protestants, same street in our case, living harmoniously, relatively, and then, but with all the same size houses, same economic opportunities and everything. And then, you know, the explosion of violence, making hard choices for a lot of people, massive displacement of Catholic residents from that part of North Belfast that we were in. And across the following year, the decision about whether we could stay or go, and really the leaving of Belfast, the leaving of Ireland, the leaving of that settled way of life, that to me, anyway, as a child, were relatively harmonious and to my childlike sensibilities, sort of idyllic sense of place. You knew who you were, you knew what your world was. And by the end of it, things had changed very profoundly. And that change, I think, has never left me. And when we came suddenly to a period at the beginning of lockdown where I was reminded of this same unsettled quality, this sense of the unknown ahead being something that as a world we were now experiencing for the first time. Were we going to have a film industry in our tiny little bit of it? But more importantly, when were you next going to see the people you love? And were they going to be safe? And these were things that I think brought all of those feelings of Belfast to the surface, and something that had been threatening to come out for decade after decade really then poured out.
Yes, and that was the interesting thing. So you kind of knew that it was there, it was threatening to come out. You had obviously thought about this many times over the years, but you're right, for everybody in lockdown, nobody knew what was around the corner. So it did make us think about losing loved ones and all of that. But what's refreshing in this, because I think for a lot of people, when they'd hear the name Belfast for a feature film, especially us Irish, you know, we're kind of like, oh, you know, who's telling the story and what will the story be like and to what extent. And I must congratulate you on the success of your perspective and in terms of telling the story through the eyes of a child, the eyes of a 9-year-old child, which really is refreshing and because obviously it is a difficult subject matter without getting into politics and so forth. And the story comes from such a place of innocence, and there's so much, you know, questioning and confusion coming at from a young child's perspective. So was that the lens that you had in your mind always for this film when you were writing it?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and Una could probably speak about a little bit about the ways in which the tone that we discovered ultimately sacrificed some, I would say, even more extreme ways of trying to not directly tackle any attempt at a comprehensive layout of the political situation, which would have been immense to do and would have it was subject to a million kinds of interpretation. You know, and somebody said to me, well, you know, what do you, if we wanted more politics in this film, what does that mean exactly? Is that more middle-aged men in suits talking on the television, or does it go back in history? One way or another, it was never going to have this amount of screen time or real estate that you could afford for something like this. And so to begin with, we included songs and what you might almost call magical realism with almost dream sequences, but where at key emotional moments, characters would lip sync in perhaps, for want of a better comparison, in the style of something you might find in a Dennis Potter piece like Pennies from Heaven or something. And ultimately, we found a tone that balanced itself a little more satisfactorily from our point of view between whatever you might call the social realism of you know, working class life with a real adherence to trying to make people sound and say things that were absolutely natural, no acting or schmacking going on, you know, just the way people talked and that feeling of sort of authenticity, but with, as you say, the naive 9-year-old's point of view, who cannot understand the politics except in the very specific. A street that was a playground is now literally a fortress. Barricades at either end, you got to sign in and sign out to get in and out of the street, and that wasn't the case 2-3 hours ago before the mob came along. And then after that, what I always remember about my experience and watching other people was the ways in which you became a sort of spy in your own life. You were then, the process of growing up was accelerated as you tried to work out what are these dangerous, difficult adult conversations happening that you must learn from. Who are these people who are sometimes asking us to do things that feel as though they are laced with a kind of danger? But then through that, which comes back to what you were saying about in terms of what you might call a sort of an unexpected tone inside a story that has a backdrop of such sort of darkness, and it was at the beginning of the onset of an incredible period of suffering for the people of that part of the world. The boy's concerns remained the same. He loved football, he loved movies, he loved the girl in the class that he was not smart enough at maths to get close enough to regularly, and he loved the sort of extended family of the street and his family. So it's not that he was indifferent or callous about what was going on, but there's only so much that a 9-year-old can cope with. The worldview is expanding rapidly and adulthood is being, as it were, foisted upon him. But finding the tone that tried to keep the integrity of the way the life was presented, a truthfulness about the way the violence arrived, but stay in that consciously sort of naive position, sometimes physically, literally being where the boy would see things. So put the camera at his height and be perhaps presenting not only what he sees, but like his own internal heightened version of what he sees. His father as a cowboy, as a Gary Cooper figure who can be bigger, wider, taller. You know, he can be, look at his back and feel like he's, I always remember that poster from The Unforgiven where Clint Eastwood's got his back to the camera and he's got the gun behind him. So the boy's movie infused images were sort of trying to find a way to guide his own little narrative through a situation where everybody was finding it hard not to lose control. Finding the tone for all of that was happily in tandem with my distinguished colleague Una, and that was a developing process. The instincts were on the page, but it developed.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I'll come to that now, actually, Una. You know, your very first connection with the story from Kenneth. But before I even go into that, Kenneth, when I talk even just about the writing, what was really lovely as well about this script that you wrote, besides the nuance, you know, that allowed the actress to really you know, deliver the various performances and characters and all that, you really delivered comedy throughout. Something that, like, you know, for us, you know, viewing that with an audience, and to hear the laughter, like we all got exactly the same jokes, was just very funny. To see a child so refreshingly talk about this as if to say, what's going on, you know, and the question of people's names, as simple as that, you know, where they, you know, if you're William or I can't recall now, maybe Kenneth or something, you were Protestant. If you were Sean or Patrick, you were Catholic. And then the young girl says, you know, but or maybe a Thomas. And he said, but hold on. She said, if it's Thomas. He said, if it's Thomas, what's wrong? And she said, Catholic, of course. And he said, no, but our cousin is Thomas and he's a Protestant. So it was just wonderful to bring it all down to that level of simplicity in one way. And even though I know the troubles, you know, it's so dark, the whole discussion and the history involved, but it was refreshing to see it through his eyes. So well done on that. Kenneth, so even was that something consciously you wanted to bring in? Were they the memories that you had, these kind of comedic elements that were there?
Well, as you say, the side by side is this darkness, and then, well, how do you negotiate the darkness? Well, you better not get yourself beaten up for a start. So you better work out how to, well, how the bloody hell do you make sure you do that? Because this would happen in the park. You'd be going home from school, people would come up to you and say, you're Protestant or Catholic. And then this sort of triple bluff game would go on, because they could easily, you had no idea what side they were from, because they were just doing it for the devilment of it sometimes, you know, and they didn't really care. In fact, there wasn't necessarily the religious division, there was just kind of mad bullying. Trying to sort it out led to this absurd, hysterical investigation of how you cover yourself. And of course, if you're 9 years old and you don't even know what most names are, or what are the Catholic or Protestant connotations, you've got maybe a central group, and you know, as one of them says to the other, you know, well, how do you learn? You have to be taught it. Who teaches you? You know, it's like that being adrift in Irish history, trying to protect yourself from this dark, horrible force. But the actual process of doing it had this hysterical, what you might call gallows humor. We know that the Irish are pretty expert at that, having to try and find as a coping mechanism, looking for I always remember this quote at the end of Love's Labour's Lost, where the character of Barone is encouraged to go and visit people in hospital by way of penance. He has to make them laugh. And he says, to move wild laughter in the throat of death, it cannot be. It is impossible. Not impossible for the Irish, but in fact, it's a necessity. So, but it often leads to, it's surreal, absurd, but sort of bittersweet, funny at times for sure.
And it was needed throughout, and it carried that story right through. So well done. But so you and Una were actually in the middle of doing kind of final stages of cutting Death on the Nile, and so you were completing that, Una, and obviously it was difficult because you're working remotely. You're in COVID times. Everybody, there's just crazy things happening, and then Kenneth, you say to Una, I've got this draft of a script. Una, can you recall when you first?
Yeah, we had been. It should be noted though that Ken Branagh is actually a very funny guy. Can I just say that for the record, in case they think you're just a very intelligent guy? He's naturally very funny. So his script was very funny. But we were working Death on the Nile, and then the Longcross Studios closed owing to the pandemic, March 27th, 2020. So Ken very kindly, I was over in London with my family, and because we couldn't even work together in the studio, I just asked Ken, could I return to Dublin where I have my studio and then the kids have a bigger garden and everything. So Ken said yes, and I returned. So we were working remotely from March until June, Quartet on Dhonghaíle, and delivering screenings for Disney. Unbeknownst to me, obviously Ken was not only, orchestrated Death on the Nile, but he was writing. So when I returned in June for the official, we had the final notes from Disney, and we were doing an official lock for the month of June. And that's when Ken suddenly produced the script and sort of said, very, very modestly, I've written a script. If you'd like to edit it, I'd love you to do it. If it's your, I can remember you said, if it's your cuppa, because I can remember looking at the title thinking, oh, Belfast, like interesting, very interesting. So I read it that night, and I think I must have emailed Ken immediately, just saying it was the most beautiful script. It was so funny and it was so lyrical and had all that sort of, as Ken was saying, that sort of magic realism. But actually it was wonderful that Ken wrote it, because by writing it and shooting it, even though as we refined the film through the edit process, I think the innate and implicit poetry of his script is retained actually in the way he shot it. So even if we did lose a sort of overt magic realism moments, we still have magic realism in a more implicit way. And it was just beautiful. It was, and with my family's background, we would be working class Catholic. My dad's from Omagh, County Tyrone. And growing up, my dad always spoke about the great friendships with Protestant people, their neighbors, who had, no children, and the big radio, and they let them all, the whole street pile in to listen to, the boxing matches that would be played on the radio. Mrs. Kinloch would be handing out the buns. So I grew up understanding the devastation of the Troubles and the complexity of Northern Ireland, but also really understanding that there were friendships and there were great Protestant people and great Catholic people, and the Troubles sort of were inescapable. So when I read Ken's story, and when I read also, he had beautiful references from the child's point of view, with the inspiration of the cinema and like a subtextual thing of escape, I just thought it was really rich. It was rich on the page, and it was a real privilege to join him as the editor.
Well, it's rich on screen as well, which is wonderful. But Kenneth, in terms of, from obviously the filmmakers that are watching in here are Academy members, and you'll be an inspiration. But for you to develop this then, and obviously fund a project like this and so forth, give us very briefly, because we'll go on then to talk about the casting and the brilliant performances and all of that. But give us a little bit of an idea of what decisions you made. Well, one good one was obviously that it was independent, which gave you the freedom to really deliver that film without somebody saying you're going to have to explain this, you're going to have to explain that. But in terms of funding it independently, what made you decide and to go that route?
COVID had question marks for everybody about what was going to be possible. Big studios were nervous about sizable projects. We were in the beginnings of the acceleration of the process of realizing that streaming was going to become absolutely fundamental to the lives of those in lockdown, and that would probably have some knock-on effect on the theatrical movie business. And so it led to a lot of nervousness. And the first thing I established after I showed the script to my brother and my sister and established that the family were okay with it, I then decided, really I didn't write it thinking we're making this film. I wrote it thinking I have to make it, and then I'll show it to my family, and then we'll see how we go. So they liked it very much, very emotional. And then I thought, well, in this new time of COVID, what should we do? So I went initially to some private equity people and who, fairly hard-nosed about these things, and they really responded very well to the screenplay, which was what was a big encouragement in terms of understanding that it traveled, and that involved sending it around the world. So you suddenly began to realize that culturally there was not a problem with people understanding what was going on. And as long as you didn't lead with the idea of saying, would you like to finance a black and white film about the Troubles? If that wasn't the first thing out of your mouth, then you could, on the whole, allow them to sort of have their own response. Then we were always trying to hedge things because we didn't know quite how it was going to work out practically. What did shooting in the time of COVID cost? What was the extra impact then? What were the practical implications? Not only what did it cost you to appropriately care for people, as we knew we must and wanted to, but also what did it cost you in terms of the shooting day, etc., etc. So we put it together very slowly, and then we had this central thing, which I know we're going to come on to, of if we can't cast the boy well, who carries this film, we don't really have a film. So I suppose then, as we looked for partners who were inside the independent film world, and we spoke to various people, and thank goodness ended up with the brilliant Focus Features, we kind of went step by step and tried to find a way to, you know, not exactly hedge our bets, but to kind of be able to offer up the elements that were going to sort of transform it from a crazy idea to things that, for instance, in the casting of Jamie Dornan and Katrina Balfe, suddenly an understanding of what the sort of energetic sort of center of the movie would be if people had some other idea of what working class Irish folk of that time would be. I'm not suggesting they all look like Katrina Balfe and Jamie Dornan, but if you imagine some other kind of more extreme thing in the opposite direction, that wasn't right either. So as we started to put the little pieces together, people suddenly started to think, oh, this is not, you know, this is not quite what we imagined, but and it's the sort of tone you've been talking about. It looks like it's available. Like, could we actually find this funny at times, or heartwarming, or uplifting? And as people got that, suddenly we started to get those you know, final kind of commitments in.
So that's interesting. So you while you were obviously, for want of a better word, touting this project around, say, you know, how are you going to bring all the components? So, which is well done, and that's why you're recognized as a very good producer as well, you know, as in your roles. But obviously at that stage you were casting then as well, because you needed to bring those to the table. So even we might just go on to that. Obviously you worked with Lucy Bevan. Did you bring her in from the early stages, or did you already, from your experience, be able to kind of make a few calls? And had you in mind who you thought of? Jamie Dornan, you thought of Katrina Balfe? What, Katrina was so central to this as the mother. So at what stage did you contact her, or how did you go about that casting process?
Lucy Bevan's now done a whole bunch of films for us with Emily Brockman, her associate. In this case, they also joined forces with Carla Strong in Belfast, who, along with the rest of the industry there, via Game of Thrones, you know, have made this incredible inroads into complex infrastructure. So you knew that that part of the world also knew how to get hold of people when it came to trying to cast Jude. It started, I guess, with Jamie and with Kieran and with Judy, because I knew that Kieran grew up half a mile from where I was born. He knew the street I lived in. We played in the same park, but we came at it from different, you know, parts of the world. And now there's a great big wall down the middle of it that still separates Catholics and Protestants. But Katrina was somebody who, aside from what I knew of her, you know, immense success in Outlander, I really remember her popping big time in Ford versus Ferrari. I remember really thinking, big scene in the car. Well, it was not an unexpected scene in the car. She's driving home with Christian Bale, who has, without telling her, decided he's going to go back into racing. Dangerous and financially difficult and everything. And she is understanding, she is sympathetic, she is funny, and then she is unbelievably angry. And she managed to do all these things in such a realistic way, because also you're in a dangerous environment. He's driving a car, that kind of high octane argument, you might crash or whatever. So she conveyed all those things. I remember thinking, watch that girl for this kind of thing. And when it, on the page, Ma clearly was emerging as this sort of urban sort of warrior queen. I remember writing that when she picks the kid up in the middle of the riot. I remember describing her as an urban Boadicea, and I thought, I want to see that Irish mother, fiery, quick to anger, quick to love, quick to laughter, all of those things. And Katrina seemed to have that at her fingertips, plus, to some extent, because she was in what you might call the beautiful worldwide isolation of Outlander, so a massive, amazing, and brilliant captive audience, but you know, less time to come out and do other work. She on some levels, to some people, was a discovery, and that for us was very exciting.
which was fabulous. And I suppose in Belfast, one of the scenes, you know, when she's on the bus, saying goodbye to her husband, but trying to convince him, he's trying to convince her to go to London, and she's trying to, and it really just shows how they're being torn apart. And even as an audience, when you first encounter this, you feel they're not going to make it. You know, this is tough. This is going to be tough. So and she really delivered so beautifully on that. And obviously Kieran Hines, the fabulous Kieran Hines, whose performance was so pivotal as well, and Judi Dench, just really brilliant. I think the casting overall, you came up trumps with it, but and obviously they've all been, you know, received so many nominations for awards and across the board, and it's not stopped yet. And tell us a little bit about, as you said, the key thing was getting the young boy right. And so Jude Hill was some discovery for you, but I think there was about 300 auditions. And I believe that much of that was done online, whether they were self-tapes in advance, I don't know, but they were then done through Zoom. That was a tough process. And at what stage did you really get very proactive, you know, when there was a selection put in front of you, and what made him stand out to you?
Well, I was proactive from the word go, because we really did believe that the film could not succeed if we didn't have a young man who, by his very presence, would allow the audience to watch the story unfold on his features. He often is listening to the grown-up conversations while we watch what he's thinking. So it needed somebody who could be still, who could think, and that process of thinking would fascinate us. So you had to be fully present. 300 young lads from all over the island of Ireland submitted tapes. So I either heard about it and did specific things, or who offered versions up in advance. And anytime it looked like we had somebody look remotely like they were going to do, I wanted to see it. But it kept sort of, you know, breaking itself down into rounds. And sometimes, young actors, they get a bit thrown, they get a bit closer to it, and they get a bit more nervous, or you discover the process means the people who can repeat are exposed rather than the people who can recreate, you know, the ones who've got fantastic, you know, held on to quality, but they can't change it, they can't be in the moment. And this was the key thing. So by the time I met Jude Hill in Belfast on a Saturday morning, rainy Saturday morning, with Lewis McCaskey, who was eventually Blade's brother, and improvised with them, that was when I could get a real assessment in the room, masked up and socially distanced and all the things that we were subject to at that time. His ability to especially to listen. How present could he be when listening? And the key with listening, or at least in my experience of it, and especially with young people, is that you want to understand that they're truly listening. They're not merely getting their response ready. And he had that with a twinkle in his eye. Again, like all Irish people, pretty quick-witted, pretty funny, and pretty reactive. So you knew that you were not getting a kind of set stage child. His mum and his dad are impressive people, and the family are lovely, and it felt like he was coming from a place where he could enjoy it, which we needed him to do as well. So then the key thing was putting together with those grown-up actors, and that not being something that threw him. And so that initial exposure was key. But they got on famously. One of the side effects of COVID was you put them in a bubble because they have to, and suddenly family life starts, whether you like it or not, because the family of the film starts to be created.
But even when you say like that, you put them together as a family, having spoken to some of the cast, and Katrina Balfe in particular, who was very impressed by your approach with the actors from day one, because they all had a kind of a connection with Northern Ireland, or an understanding of it, having certain experiences there, or living close to the border, or as in Kieran's case, for example, living not too far from where you grew up as a young child. But you brought them all together around a table, and you started, you know, getting them to discuss, you know, about their own past, getting them to think about what it was like growing up, you know, being a child of that age, the relationship with the parents, and where the troubles in Northern Ireland might have set into that. It was a very, very interesting way of doing it. It broke down any barriers for them as actors working together, and really built this sense of a family as well. Was that something you intuitively knew as an actor initially first that could be good to get these people connected, or where did that concept come from?
Well, you're always trying to create something authentic, and you're trying as quickly as possible, if you want some feeling of ensemble or family, to create a shared experience immediately. Day one, minute one, practically, you want people to be experiencing something together for the first time that bonds them, that unites them. They were there when this thing happened. An example would be the character, the granny, Judy, reads a journal called The People's Friend. This is a sort of quasi-religious journal in which romantic stories of the kind of Mills and Boon variety are sprinkled with a little religious instruction and a simple moral. Judy, her eyes are not good enough to read such things. She didn't know about this journal, neither did Jude Hill, neither did Kieran Hines. Kieran Hines read one of these stories, only a page worth, but as he was doing that, and Judi Dench was getting a sense of what it was that caught Granny's eye and ear in these romantic she was getting to hear Kieran Hines, whose voice she then fell in love with, and Jude Hill was watching the two of them interact with each other. Dornan and Balfe were tickled by this story of a doctor who lodged with a family with a young and quiet girl in the house who carried a torch for the doctor. He never understood this until he comes back having got his degree and realizes that she's the girl of his dreams and he never saw it. So it rounds itself up in a neat story. Well, by the end of it, by the time the two naughty ones were laughing, Jude Hill is like trying to work out what the heck's going on. Judy's got a bit of implicit research, and Kieran finishes and goes, "Holy God, what was that all about?" You suddenly, then they go off and have a cup of tea, and then they can talk about the daft director, or whether they're going to now book a subscription for The People's Friend.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, really, really well done. And obviously, Kenneth, you had originally wanted to film this in Belfast, obviously, but COVID and the situation just wouldn't allow that, and you wound up recreating the street on an airport runway close to London. But I believe you went initially to Belfast and you did a recce as such with Harris, your wonderful cinematographer, and you shot a couple of hours of footage to kind of really get a sense of Belfast and so forth. I think you shared that with Una as well. Tell us a little bit about that and why you did so.
Well, we did our ninja raid there. The first thing was to try and find a street that we could shoot in, but of course we were going to have to denude it of all 21st century stuff, and then we were going to, which COVID would not allow us to do, we were going to have to ask to see if we could move some of the families out. And that was a health risk. So we just simply wasn't going to be possible, the combination of those things. So instead I said to Jim Clay, our production designer, Harris, and to Celia Duval, our co-producer, would they mind getting on city bikes, and we'll just go around I said, you'll see that the city isn't so big, it's a grown-up city, but it's not so geographically big, it's wrapped around that lock, and it's backed by the Cave Hill, and you'll get a sense of the city that way. And we visited some houses that were the same size. People were kind enough to let us in, so Jim could do his measurements. We really get the dimensions of all of that, and we had the lark of it as well. It was quite fun to do all of that. And we were also accompanied by a team of our colleagues from the north who were, potentially going to shoot other stuff. But we started by getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go down and be underneath Samson and Goliath, the cranes that open the movie, and great dominant features of the Belfast skyline. And essentially, we came back to Una and said, look, here's our, on the phone, on the Digicamera GoPro version of this. Why don't you put that together? Because I think that's the beginning of what the film might be. And then we'll go back and shoot it properly. But ours was the kind of ninja raid. And of course, sometimes when you do that, and then sometimes when you give that kind of stuff to somebody like Una, it's really worth remembering all the goodies in what you might call the rough stuff.
Yes.
That hadn't been super planned. It was just, three mad people on a bike, possibly about to be arrested.
Yes.
What are you doing filming the Koreans at 3 o'clock in the morning? Oh, we're waiting for the door. We're waiting for a great light in the sky, which we were.
Yeah, and so you would have, so you put it on this kind of like DigiPro-Res file, and you sent that to Una at that stage. And do you start collaborating then at that stage and discussing what the movie is going to be, Una?
Yeah, so this was early August, actually. I think this was the first week of August, somewhere around there anyway. It was before principal photography. So as Ken said, he sent it to me. Sarah Baden, very kindly, who was our second assistant on Death on the Nile, she digitized all the material, sent it to me. And it was about 3.5 hours, 4 hours maybe, but beautiful stuff. Ken had obviously written in his script that the opening of the prologue was always modern with Van Morrison. There was also a question, exploration of the voice. So basically Ken just said to me, let's try it, based on his script as well, to just work that out. So the two of us were working every day for about 4 days, refining it. I'd sent it to Ken. We were zooming in on some of the imagery. If it was from the phone, we could have done a freeze frame and just found the pieces that really resonated with Ken, because I think your approach really was to see Belfast with fresh eyes and not to show, the murals, which might have political backdrop, but try and see the city in a new way. So that's what we were trying. And by the Thursday, we had a very good cut as a guide of what the prologue might be. And then, as Ken says, he was able then to very quickly communicate with the Northern Irish team in the event that if he wasn't able to come back, or if he could come back, at least they could hit the ground running, because we had this template, which was and is the beginning of the movie.
And one of the things that Una points out there is that we were making this film at a point when you never knew when, you were going to get out of the building in time, as it were. You never knew when the door was going to shut in your face. So we worked much quicker, made much quicker decisions, particularly when, the prospect that maybe the city was going to get locked down again. That's what we were facing. And so we had to be very fleet of foot. And some of the decisions Una made very much informed, the way we went back and shot what we did manage to get with our digital cameras, that ended up in the movie. So it was, the editing process definitely fed the production process in that case.
Yeah, fantastic. And what kind of decisions were they, Una, just to give us a little insight, or was there anything?
Well, probably things like the construction maybe of the shots. I think we were able to watch it. We'd have to watch it again, Ken, but I think it's pretty. There's similarity. There's key imagery that Ken had got on his phone, or Harris, which in play, whoever had got it, say of the man with the face, the marble face, or the girl being carried, the mural of the girl. But I think the biggest one was really that, again, from a writing point of view, it probably, because Ken did everything actually at such speed and instinct, I think actually the speed and instinct with which he worked, and then we as his team, we had to keep up with that momentum. For instance, the voice, within 4 days, I think, Ken, we had sort of said, okay, actually Van Morrison on his own without a voice just seemed to reveal itself, that actually the voice was a great tool for writing the script, but it was something that Ken was actually very bravely able to let go of and say, okay, let's try this. So that was one of the biggest things, I think, that it became a visual poem with Van Morrison's music.
Also, I think that a specific thing to answer your question as well was we had our kind of own very lightweight sort of domestic drone on our initial scout, and there was a development that is a personal taste of mine that Una understood and developed when it came to presenting some of the kind of unexpected images in Belfast, like Belfast Castle, which has a sort of fairy tale quality to it, which is in the middle of a city, which is much more sort of masculine and kind of engineering in some ways. And the way we shot that, vertiginous angles, both down or very, very steeply up on architecture, like there's a statue outside the city hall, not seeing things horizontally, already beginning to feel God's eye point of views and child point of views in terms of even the way we began the opening montage.
Yeah. What's brilliant about the film, obviously, is the choice to go black and white. But my understanding is it was shot in color, and then graded, where it needs to be. What was wonderful about that was that you were then able to introduce back in color where you wanted it in the narrative at stages later on, which I thought was spectacular. But shooting it in color was great. Where did that idea come from? Did you know that yourself at the start?
We knew we wanted black and white. We knew that we wanted these real punches of color, particularly with the family movies that made the big impact. We knew we wanted to use natural light. We knew that we didn't want to try and impose any kind of sort of grading grain or anything in terms of non-diffusion to try and make a kind of photographic imposition that we might get stuck with. We didn't, it was partly COVID as well. We didn't get into the world of Atmos on smoke Atmos, to give anything, because sometimes it can make things look very sort of, before you know who you are picturesque in a second. And really, you wanted a kind of cleaner atmosphere in the sense of, smoke or mist of any kind, cleanliness, which ultimately, from my point of view, also translated to what I was after from the black and white, which was this kind of liquid, satiny, silky, Guinnessy black and white, that from the boys' point of view made the family seem glamorous, but also made it distinct. It wasn't trying to be a kind of too washed out European black and white. There was something sort of Hollywoody about it, actually, which is, I think, how the
gorgeous
the boys saw it, and not heading into the kind of thing that will suddenly lead it into too consciously a kind of memory piece. It was going to be that anyway. So it was part of a series of decisions, and we tested all this ahead of time. Harris loves testing things, and we got our black and white look, and every day we would have in the little DI suite, we would work out our grade for that day's dailies, and then begin to see how color could really smash in and be a great. One of my favorite cuts in the movie is suddenly to go from a black and white kind of heightened, authentic, kind of grittier than gritty kind of quality in a back alleyway to a massive, deep orange red account of molten lava as a million years BC smashing.
That's right.
And I think from an audience's point of view,
that was for which film it was shown up on the screen. It cut straight to
what would be Raquel Welch in a million years BC. So you see volcanic materials, and then you see dinosaurs fighting, and but it's quite unsettling. And that was also one of the things that we wanted to do in a positive way, is just feel that the audience didn't get sort of seduced into some kind of idea that it was going to be a sort of permanent black and white reverie, kind of, sinking down into some sort of permanently sentimental thing. It had a kind of, things could cut across it and unsettle in the same way as the atmosphere of what was happening to the characters was also unsettling, because we didn't know what was going to happen.
Brilliant decisions, and you mentioned earlier on in our discussion about the fact that a lot of the angles for the cinematography were from the child's point of view, and it really made that, combined with the black and white, really gave it a great aesthetic, in when you see it in the cinema screen.
Anya, do you mind me also added in what I loved that Ken also did with his team, because he's obviously worked with so many of these people before, but Jim Clay, when he was doing the set, he worked with Ken to work out the paint, which paint would work better with black and white. And Charlotte Walter, who did the costumes, she was knitting garments, so again, knowing which ones would have deep crevices so that Harris and Ken could light them. And I thought that attention to detail across the board in all the other departments added to that sort of authenticity, and that's something that I don't know if many people have been sort of applauding that, but I think
it's that detail. It's all so subtle, but I know for a lot of people in the auditorium, when we screened it privately for the members, that people really went, oh my gosh, you brought back memories of all of these moments, whether it was something somebody was watching on television at the time, it's the toys that they had, the compliances in the kitchen, all of that. It was just so well done from that respect. And Kenneth, for you, Van Morrison plays a big part in this. Obviously, he wouldn't have necessarily been at that very, very time, but obviously he's been a big part of the history of Belfast. So hats off to you for including him in such a way. And was that a personal choice? Are you a big fan, or had you just tried out certain styles of music and then you chose to stick with him?
Because of his sort of being inbuilt into the fabric of Belfast, I think, with at that stage in 1969, his world-beating album Astral Weeks had been, you know, in the charts for a couple of years. So as it were, he was one of our own, but he was still in his late 20s, but people around the world knew about him. And it was an album that included songs about characters like, you know, Madame George, a sort of potentially aging transvestite on the streets of Belfast, you know, which is both shocking and amazing and brilliant. That sort of, that openness, that character was so real. He talking about real streets like Cypress Avenue, and these were becoming, you know, so Belfast was being expressed around the world and understood from somebody who described himself as a corner boy, somebody who picked up his music by being like these kids you see in the film on the streets, and absorbing that with the arrival of American music, and then fusing them in with that amazing voice of his into something quite distinct, unique even, as a musical force. We understood that to have the sort of unity of voices, as Una was hinting at, that soulfulness in Van, in the voice, but also in his own sort of bittersweet relationship to Belfast, in the sense of, you know, the bittersweetness about what you feel about a place that has warmed your heart and broken your heart. You know, that's the nature of the history of the place. And so when he also agreed to provide this kind of meditative mood music that we have about 20 minutes of in the piece, that has saxophone and electric piano, you feel that comes from a very real place of contemplation for a man who's been on those streets and he's been away. So he identified with that sense. He spoke directly about that it definitely, it rang important bells for him. And so there was something, I felt what he was bringing was very personal. When we selected songs, he was helpful with remixing and arrangements. He wrote the opening song, Down to Joy, has now been nominated for an Oscar. Which is amazing. And but that sort of that mood music, which didn't constitute enough to, in terms of minutes of music, to constitute a full score, but it's a very integral part of the movie for the unspoken.
It's terrific, and obviously the central piece for Jamie Dornan, you know, again, you know, bringing new skills to the screen for Jamie. It just looked wonderful, and again in black and white. But the role of music in this film was just so well chosen. And for you overall, how do you feel about having delivered the film now and the reactions from audiences? How do your family feel about that when they finally saw it on screen?
Well, I tell you, when they saw it on screen, we obviously, it was a very, very emotional time. And you know, I've said this before, but you know, when we got past the tears and everything, and as we were finally having a cup of tea at the end of because it was COVID when they first watched it, so we were outside. It was freezing. It was December. But the only way we could have a meal together was to be outside. So we had whatever we had, and then we finished up with a cup of tea. And my brother said to my sister, "What do you think Mum and Dad would have thought?" And she said they'd have been delighted with the casting.
Yes,
my mother would certainly have approved of that. But no, the reaction's been astonishing. And when I think maybe the biggest jump in the air that I made through the whole of this. What is it? It is 2.5 years now. Was when an email came through from Universal, and the headline said, "Belfast, #1 movie in Ireland."
Yeah.
That was, you know, was like, you know, beyond. I just, it was absolutely thrilling. That's, you know, both ends, as it were, through the whole place, and in every cinema in the north, and you know, so many people in the rest of the country, you know, the rest of the island embracing it and recognizing things. And I found this in Liverpool, working class New York or Chicago, now Australia. So there is a connection.
It's an international story in a sense, you know, where there's any trouble, you know, when there's conflict, civil unrest, and where people are displaced from their loved ones and so forth. And so for you, it must have been poignant for you to think of your mother and knowing, you know, that she did have to leave under those circumstances. You've been a good son. You've told the story well.
Well, I hope she would think so. The scene you mentioned earlier on that Katrina Balfe does so beautifully on the bus, where she lays out the sacrifice. She basically says, this is, I reckon, what we'll have to choose between. We can have safety for the kids, but we'll probably be giving up something that you can't quite quantify in words, or economic opportunity that you might describe as a bit of your Irish soul. And they chose to give a bit of that away. And I hope maybe this story will, wherever they are.
Yes.
Pour it to them.
Well, look, and I'm sure you were conscious of that growing up, and it really is wonderfully told. And I must say, for Judi Dench, Dame Judi Dench, would break your heart at the end of the movie for those who mightn't have seen it already. I think most people have seen it at this stage now, but the lines that she delivers, you know, for any mother knowing that she's got to leave her son, go with his family because it's better for him. That was a very poignant moment. Tell us a bit about the filming of that final piece.
She was so open to improvising. There were scripted lines, but the goal was to try and find from her, with this amazing face, her stillness, her command of the film medium, whatever she might say as a person of the theatre, but she's become a consummate film artist. So she stayed still over 4 or 5 minutes as we did it again and again and again. And eventually she came up with her own version of things. And that's what you see in the movie. And as she did it, it felt as though if this was the sound of a bell ringing or tolling, it was getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until she hit it bang in the middle. And I said cut, went to the monitor. I was watching by the camera. That's what I like to do. Asked to play it back because I thought we just had a piece of gold. And I suddenly went, oh no, I can hear something. What the hell is that on the soundtrack? Have we ruined it? And they said, sir, that's your intake of breath at that last take. So that was me going, because she was so incredible. And so it was a privilege to watch her do it. And
you know, can I think also, you know, when you wrote those last lines of the film, I think what Belfast has done so well is actually to take the personal story of this family seen through the eyes of that little boy, but then the universality of that, the humanity of what they've experienced, and those last lines for those who left, for those who stayed, and for all of those who were lost, or those who stayed, those who left, and all of those who were lost. I think once Ken wrote those lines, it just felt like that was the best ending to the film. And I know, Ken, you were saying that at festivals or things, people have come up to you who are maybe with a Nigerian background or Jewish or Syrian or Polish, whatever, that people can actually understand that, the grief of having to leave your homeland, whether it's for war or economic reasons or whatever it may be, and that you can't return. That's why, you know, those last little shots, I quite like those. I'll have to get that Francis Ledwidge poem for you, The Little Boy in the Morning. He whistles at another gate. If anyone knows that, still I wait, he will not come.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but he whistles at another gate. But when Ken shot some of the footage that Ken and Harris have shot, and the way Ken framed it, they were so beautiful that they actually, and also I think because Ken did always have a very strong vision of the music, even before it was all Van Morrison, it was never going to be score, which actually enabled us, even from principal photography, to build up, you know, that sound world. So I can remember emailing Ken in August and sort of asking him before he began shooting, what were his sound memories? And he immediately said, like the ice cream van, which I always quite liked, the trains, constant trains near his home, the ship horns, all those sounds of Belfast. So we started building those from the beginning, even before the sound guys officially started. But Simon Chase, one of our sound team, he was able to feed in any little sounds that we might need during August and September before they started in October. And I think that also lends itself to that memory and accessibility for people when you watch the film, that you really remember those sounds, or the counterintuitive thing of having the ice cream van during the riot. So you just understand, as Ken said, this place where barricades are being built, but children still have to go to school, and that balance of normal life continuing in this extraordinary situation. So just...
Well, Una, I can see clearly why Ken collaborates with you, because you get it. Certainly all the various elements, which is great. And Ken, you brought an extraordinary team around you to deliver this film. But can I say, from an Irish point of view, delivering Belfast it's a wonderful film. It, as Una said, it transcends any particular country. It stands up in its own right as a beautiful human story, very well told. And I think maybe we should start telling more stories through the eyes of the children. And there's a great honesty about it. And look, congratulations and well done. And thank you for taking the time, both of you, to talk to us about the background to making this film. It's been so interesting, and best of luck on the rest of the journey, and enjoy the audiences, and thank you for taking the time. For Kenneth and Una, take care.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.